The State of Hawaii Board of Education Human Resources Committee is called to order. We're now at a point of our agenda where we receive public testimony on Human Resources Committee agenda items. Is there any public testimony?
Yes, there is, Chair. Vanessa Ott.
Good morning, Ms. Ott. I know we've received some written testimony on here from the audience.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I submitted written testimony on a different agenda item. Just want to address number 4A. There wasn't a link there before, so I didn't see any information about this. So I may not be addressing the proper thing, but in the coming year, I'd really like to see the Board of Education help the superintendent and set objectives for the Department of Education to become more open, transparent, and responsive. So I've communicated with the board before about problems with getting responses to requests for information, not just things that I've asked for, but teachers have asked for. And I've also asked in the past to bring back a lot of the information that was hidden, that became hidden from the public regarding procedures and policies with the Department of Education once they did their revision of the website. So we all know that community engagement is very important. Studies have been done. Community engagement to build really good schools is very important. And to engage the community, they need to be informed. They need to have their questions answered. So please put that on the docket of expectations for the coming year, for the principal, for the superintendent to get going. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Ott. We appreciate you also recording our meetings and posting them.
No further testimony at this time, Chair.
Okay, we'll move to the approval of the meeting minutes of August 18, 2015, which have been circulated. If there's no objection, we'll indicate by unanimous consent that the minutes have been approved. Seeing no objection, so approved. We now move to discussion item, presentation on the complex area superintendent evaluation process and timeline.
Good morning, Chair DeLima, members of the committee. Stephen Schatz, Deputy Superintendent. This is an item that's a follow-up from a previous conversation with this committee on complex area superintendent evaluations and how those are done. You have a one-pager that is titled Presentation on the Complex Area Superintendent Evaluation Process and Timeline, which should be in your electronic folders. Essentially, the complex area superintendents are evaluated by the deputy superintendent on an annual basis. The form and process that is used is the EMCP, which is the Excluded Managerial Compensation Plan. And this form and this process is the same form that's used for the superintendent's evaluation. So you're likely pretty familiar with that particular form and the process. And the system evaluates two aspects of managerial work, one being overall management, and the second being performance objectives and program accomplishments. In other words, goals and outcomes that are specific to that particular person's job description and the goals that they would like to accomplish for that particular year. For, in our case here, the deputy superintendent, starting with Deputy Superintendent Nozoe, did consistent meetings with the complex area superintendents throughout the year. He called them stock takes, which I am continuing with. And those conversations were about the formative data that was available at any given moment, as well as conversations about the degree to which folks were making progress both on their overall management as well as performance objectives and program accomplishments. Normally, I should say traditionally, the annual evaluation is a July 1 through June 30th, but we have actually changed the cycle somewhat for our complex area superintendents to align it with our Strive High results. So we've backed it up a little bit, just like we did with our principals. So the principals comprehensive evaluation system, the CISA, is 45 days after Strive High comes out, and so we've aligned our complex area superintendent evaluation timeline as such, and I intend to complete all the complex area superintendent evaluations by October of this year. Using both the data that I have from my 5 months on the job, as well as some of the information that I have from Deputy Superintendent Nozoi's conversations with his area superintendents.
Any questions? Okay, I have a few questions. So, the objectives for the complex area superintendents, did you find that the objectives are different for the respective complex area superintendents? Or
There's some overlap certainly because we make sure that it's aligned with our strategic plan, but at the same time, every community has its specific needs, so they set goals that are relevant for their schools.
Now, the superintendent's evaluation was made public, and when the superintendent's evaluation was made public, it was noted that one of her first objectives was to reduce the achievement gap. And by her own recognition, she indicated that there was not significant progress regarding that achievement gap. Did the objectives for the complex area superintendents also reflect a need to reduce the achievement gap?
I think so. I think it's one of the things, when I sit down with the complex area superintendents, we'll be looking retrospectively at 14-15 school year, but we'll be setting goals for the upcoming school year. And so, to your point, I think we'll be looking very closely at achievement gaps.
I appreciate that the stock takes do look at formative data, because I think it's important that in order to reduce the achievement gap, we need to recognize what students are having the most difficulty in the student achievement. But I am still very concerned that our special needs and ELL students or ESL students are struggling the most. I really appreciate the fact that today we've cleared the record that all our personnel are excluded managerial compensation plan personnel are being evaluated, and there is no segment from the superintendent down to the teachers that are not being evaluated. And I think it's important that this ongoing evaluation process is consistent and continues to make student achievement its #1 priority. And I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. Are there any other questions in this area? I know that some people were appreciative of the defining the acronym EMCP. So, Amy?
What is the timeline for bringing the evaluations then back to the board?
Actually, the evaluations don't come to the board.
They do for the approval of at the end for when they were last year, when they were categorized. Because the categories for the CAS evaluations were changed.
I'm not certain, but that's a question I don't know the answer to. And Stephen, you
Because we
can you
did
share
look
any-
at the scope of evaluations across the board from, for all of the, 15 CASs and where did they lie in terms of the scales of performance or the ways that they were measured. And so that did come back before the board, and I'm not sure if that was just a part of the recreation of the evaluation system or if that will be an ongoing thing.
I think it was in conjunction with Chair, if you recall, when we were looking at this challenge with CAS, the salaries relative to principals, and went through a whole year of trying to have CAS 1, CAS 2, CAS 3 categories. I don't think we've gotten into the individual evaluations of the individual cases. Right, so, we're saying-
Right, so that whole, once the evaluations are done, that's not that.
I think it would be perhaps an executive session discussion in terms of an overview of the evaluation results. That might be a healthy discussion. And I think the board, there's been some discussion about how our principals selected and the process by which principals are selected. And I think we want to visit that issue. And I think at the same time, we can talk about how principals are evaluated and over the evaluation of the CASs, and perhaps that type of discussion in terms of systemic review of the evaluation process might be in order. So it's comprehensive. And we'll place it on an agenda and within the next, by the end of the year. We'll place it on the agenda by the end of the year, and we'll have more discussions with Barbara and yourself about how we can get the data that would make sense for the board to review in our overview responsibility. Does anyone have any other questions or comments about anything related to this? Okay, thank you very much, Deputy
Thank you.
Superintendent. Okay, just to clarify, when we approved the minutes by unanimous consent, it included the executive session minutes. And if anyone has any objections to that, please indicate. Seeing none, we'll move on to recommendation for action of the committee on deadlines and timeline for Department of Education investigations of employee leave, department director leaves, and leaves pending investigation. I just want to indicate that we also have agendized this matter for an update in executive session. So why don't we have the presentation, and then I do want to indicate that we're going to receive more information at the executive session that we cannot receive during the public session because of the nature of the investigations and the fact that we're going to get specific and detailed information that about personnel matters that are governed by state law would be required to be discussed in the executive session. So with that, Assistant Superintendent Craig, you have the...
Good morning, Barbara Krieg, Assistant Superintendent, Office of Human Resources. I also have with me today to respond to questions either on these procedures here in open session or on the individual cases in executive session. Both Nanette Ho'okano, Nanette is, you may recall from last time, she is the administrator for the Office of Human Resources Investigation Section. And also today we have Beth Schimmelfennig, who is the acting director of the Civil Rights Compliance Office. We refer to that as CRCO. The CRCO has responsibility for cases involving civil rights issues, protected classes when it comes to employment. Civil Rights Compliance Office, as you'll see, has a majority of the cases. And so we feel it's important that Beth be involved in the discussion, and also that whatever questions you have, she's here to help respond to them. So for this agenda item, what we've done first of all is, as requested at the last HR committee meeting, we provided a copy of our most recent draft of the procedures for DDL and LPI. So our goals with these procedures are, first of all, to have a succinct, easy to follow summary for those involved in investigations and decision making, which is somewhat of a summary of what is in the investigations guidance, but it runs through to be a helpful tool for principals, for CASs, for everybody involved in cases where employees are placed on leave and then there's an investigation. As you can see from the draft, we have in there at the moment, we have blanks where numbers will or may eventually come in. And the reason I say may is that certainly for investigations, it's pretty straightforward that we'll have numbers in there. For the post-investigation process, what we're still not internally certain about, and one of the issues that we're getting feedback on is whether it makes sense to be so granular on the timelines or whether it makes more sense to be to group some of the more discrete tasks. At the moment, the procedures are broken down into discrete tasks so that for discussion purposes, we've talked to the CASs, we've talked to some of the vice principals, we're going out to see more vice principals, we'll be talking with principals, we have pros involved, we have the Civil Rights Compliance Office involved. We want to make sure that there's an awareness of all of the steps and all of the issues so that when we eventually present a proposed set of procedures that would be consulted with the unions, we have grouped the steps in the process for timeline purposes in a manner that makes sense and is workable. So what you see now is not necessarily the final product, and that's part of the reason that we've asked for no action, a recommendation of no action by the board at this point in time, because we are in the process of getting stakeholder input and really making sure that what we end up with is something that is useful and workable and achieves the multiple goals of the reasons that we're doing the procedures. We presented some additional materials in part to assist with our discussion in executive session, and then when we realized it doesn't contain confidential information, we wanted to share it publicly as well, but also as a reminder of the context in which we are issuing these DDL LPI procedures. And that is pie charts. There's 2 pages of pie charts to try to give a visual reminder of the fact that we're not only talking about investigations themselves here. We are talking about a process that includes, in appropriate circumstances, employee investigations, but it also includes a post-investigation phase that is critical as well, obviously, to the determination of what ultimately will happen with the employees who are placed on leave. So when I was here a month ago, at the time we had 43 open cases in which employees were placed on leave. As of, I think, last Thursday, we were down to 39, and then on Friday we were up to 41. Certainly it changes, we do snapshots in time. So as of Friday, there were 41 cases of employees on leave. That would be department-directed leave, DDL, or leave pending investigation, LPI. And the first of the pie charts, the one that says open DDL and LPI cases as of September 11, 2015, is a representation for all of the 41, what stage they are at. So 25 of the 41 are still in the investigations process, and that means that a final investigation report has not yet been delivered to the first-line decision maker. In 4 of the cases, the first-line decision maker, that being the principal, has received a final investigation report and has not yet made a determination of what should be done in response to the report's findings. For 8 of the 41, the principal has made a recommendation and delivered the recommendation to the complex area superintendent, the CAS. And in 4 of the cases, the complex area superintendent has made a recommendation to the superintendent. The superintendent is the final decision maker. Now, at each of these stages in the decision-making process, the employee has what we generally refer to as due process rights. So I think it's important to understand and appreciate that there's more than the delivery of a report. There is a review and analysis, a preliminary determination made by the decision maker, and then the employee actually meets with the decision maker, usually is with a union representative. If the employee doesn't want a union representative, then that wouldn't necessarily happen. But then the employee has an opportunity to present any additional information he or she wishes to make. That additional information is then considered before the decision maker makes a recommendation to the next line up. And there are cases in which, based on the information an employee presents, recommendations are not accepted, or the decision maker, including the superintendent, would make a final decision that is not consistent with what the recommendation has been. So this post-investigation phase is very, very important And until that is entirely completed, there is no certainty as to what discipline, if any, will be imposed in any particular case. The second pie chart on that page says cases under investigation by investigator. We've broken it down by the different points of investigation. Civil Rights Compliance Office has the majority of the investigations. I have said before, and I will continue to say, Civil Rights Compliance Office handles a tremendously complex workload in a number of different areas related to civil rights, involving students and involving employees, not only investigations, and the Civil Rights Compliance Office does an amazing job given the very limited resources within that office. And we'll go into some of that in more specific detail in executive session relating to personnel. But the reason that we wanted to emphasize this as well is so that we can see where resources need to be directed. More recently, some of our OHR, Office of Human Resources investigators, have started to take on investigations of cases that are at the Civil Rights Compliance Office. Once we have brought in 2 more investigators, and again, those recruitments are underway, we will take on some more of those cases, because one of CRCO's greatest challenges as it affects employees on leave is a backlog, a historical backlog of cases that they're working through. 4 of the cases are with OHR at the moment, 2 are with the district investigators, and then 4 are with the schools. That would typically be the vice principals. The second page is to give a snapshot of the aging of the cases, and then this again is where we can go into much more detail in executive session. But as you can see, we have it's roughly broken up into thirds, but slightly more. More cases, a third at 12 plus months, about a third at 7 to 11 months, and then we have slightly less at the 0 to 6 months. That, again, is all cases in all stages, investigations and decision-making. And then we broke it down into, for investigations, what is the aging on the investigations themselves. So 7 out of the 25 cases on the employee leaves list are still in the investigation stages. Of those 25, 7 are at 1 year or more where the final investigation report has not been delivered. 9 are at 7 to 11 months, and 9 are at 0 to 6 months. So hopefully this gives some context to the challenges and where we, DOE, need to really pay attention in terms of moving to where we want to be, which is to have all of the cases completed expeditiously and employee situations resolved expeditiously.
Any questions? Okay, so I know we can go into more detail in the executive session, but I just want to put some context to the presentation. So we have 25 cases that are presently under investigation and 16 cases that are pending decision-making either by the principal, 4 cases, CAS, 8 cases, and superintendent, 4 cases. Now, of those cases that are pending decision-making, which is 16 of the 41 open cases, are there cases more than 6 months pending decision-making?
Yes.
That seems a long time.
So the committee last time asked me to come back and to go through and provide specific details, which we have prepared for executive session, on the longest, the oldest, or oldest case or cases. What we did is that we looked at the 3 longest open cases. And as you'll see when we give the details, there's quite a variety in terms of the reasons for the length of the cases. So
But I'm talking about decision-making.
correct.
So
The two oldest cases have been in decision-making much longer than they've been in investigation. The first oldest case, and let me just start by saying, I'm sure it always comes down to competing priorities at every stage by every person involved. So in the first case, we have had several changes of principal and change of CAS. That slows down decision-making. In the second oldest case, we have change of CAS, that slows down decision-making. In the third oldest case, we have an employee who was out on sick leave for a year. That slows down decision-making. So there are different reasons that every stage takes time.
So, in our responsibility for overview and oversight, it just seems to me that when it comes to decision-making, when you have somebody on directed leave, it has to be more of a priority. And as the assistant superintendent in charge, I believe that you are sincere in your effort to address this problem. So I'm okay with concurring with your recommendation that we take no action today. Because I think you should have an opportunity to implement your perspective that you are getting a handle on this problem and that you are addressing the myriad of difficulties that all stages of the situation are experiencing. Having said all that though, we gotta do better. And I think our job is to keep this on the front burner of attention to see whether these cases that are in decision-making get actually decided. And I think the message got to be from the board to yourself, to the people that have to make these decisions, is that our patience is at the end of the line. That they got to, whoever it is that needs to be making these decisions, need to be making these decisions. And that the next time we agendize this thing, I would like to see less of it being open for decision making. And you can probably explain with more detail, but I don't want to leave the public with the impression that we have a lack of confidence in you as a leader, because we don't. I think you're bringing this to the forefront, and you're giving it the attention and professionalism that this problem deserves. So I just want to make sure that you understand that there's a lot of confidence in your leadership, and that we would like to see us make more progress in this area.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those comments. And as I repeated, believe me, I and we, superintendent, deputy superintendent, all of the assistant superintendents, very much appreciate the challenges that are faced by employees in these situations, and we are very much all focused on doing everything that we can so that we are eliminating the barriers and we are improving the situation. It's not just me, it is superintendent and all of us.
I appreciate that. Patricia?
So I actually have two questions. The first one is, one of the issues that's been raised is the notion that those who've been identified don't have a chance to talk about the situation, so kind of a gag order type experience. And so in the policy or the procedures, is there anything discussing this, or has there been thoughts about how to still recognize the rights of that individual within a realistic time frame and being able to talk to a lawyer or so forth in this process?
Any employee can talk to a lawyer at any time. Any employee can talk to a union representative at any time. What we do ask, and we put it's in our template letter that was also produced to the board at an earlier HR committee meeting, we do say in the letter that we encourage that employees do not discuss this with others. We do not, there is no such thing as a gag order. We cannot and do not stop people from saying whatever they want. The real concern, however, is at what point is an employee trying to influence witnesses to circumstances. And this especially is a concern when you have allegations against a superior, if you will, and subordinates are the ones who are the witnesses. That's the concern. It's all about the integrity of the investigation. You know, it's all about influence as opposed to what somebody says or does not say to others in the workplace.
So the letter itself highly discourages talking to others about it, but it doesn't preclude them from.
Correct.
Okay, so has it been interpreted in the field in that sense, or, because I know if I were to get a letter like that that said that, I wouldn't think I had these rights. And so does the field understand that, or will that be clear in the protocol and the policy that
Well, I don't
it's
know.
such?
I don't know what is or is not clear in the field. I do know that it says we encourage you. It doesn't say you are prohibited from. And that is something that in the past, there had been a prohibition, and then in light of, frankly, legal changes, where we knew that we cannot prohibit people from saying what people will say. If, however, it comes out in an investigation that you've influenced the witnesses or are perceived to be intimidating witnesses, and again, that becomes a concern when you're dealing with superiors and subordinates, then that is going to be a problem and will be held against the employee. But I believe, I don't recall what's in the template letters at the moment, but we do know that the employees who are placed on leave are in contact with their unions. We also notify their unions when they are placed on leave. And at that point, the union is really the representative party for the employee.
Thank you for clarifying that. My second question has to do with just if we don't take any action on this today, what is your timeline in terms of handling this issue?
We will have a finalized draft to go to the unions for consultation within a month, I would say. We've got, as I said, we're scheduled to go to another vice principals meeting, and we need to get input from principals. At that point, it remains to be seen how long the consultation process will take. Certainly, there are different interests on the parts of, I think, different unions, and we just have to see what they come up with and how long they take to give us the feedback.
Ms. Cox?
Thank you, Chair. Then I don't have a problem with this coming back to us, but when it comes back, I would like to see some numbers in those blanks. And I understand that you're saying it's difficult to judge, but in the past, things have gone on really, really way too long. And I understand you're working on that really hard. So I would really like to see some numbers in there, and if those numbers can't be made, then there needs to be a process for exceptions. But if there's nothing in the guidelines that really give people a feel for how long all this, because if I were out on leave, I would be, and if it goes on over a year, I think that's really painful. And especially if it ends up that I didn't do anything wrong. I mean, that's even worse. So I'm just speaking for myself, but I really would encourage to have some numbers on there. Thanks.
When we send a copy to the unions for consultation, there will be numbers. So that will be within a month or so. And in whatever form this committee wants a report on that, we're happy to provide a copy of the consultation letter and the finalized draft.
Thank you. I guess to piggyback on Board Member Hollergall's question, once you get feedback from the unions, what would be your timeline to finalize and provide a recommendation?
It depends on what the feedback from the union is. The way the consultation process works is when we send it, any consultation with the union, when we send information, in this case, what I call a finalized draft to the unions, if they come back with feedback and we believe that we should make changes in response to the feedback, then we may have another round of consultation. If comments from the union are either relatively minor or they have feedback, they have preferences, and we decide not to make any revisions, then as soon as we have the feedback and we say, thank you, we're going ahead with the draft. We have had significant challenges in my time here in terms of consultation with HGEA taking very long, and that is a concern. to be entirely candid. I mean, it takes typically months and months.
I
So that's why
recognize
I
that's
hesitate.
probably out of your
Yeah.
control. I just suggest then to the chair that we continue to have this on the agenda until, with updates, until we get some better sense of timeline, once you get a better sense from the unions as to where they are.
As currently structured, we plan to come back here with updates on DDLs, LPIs, investigations, procedures twice a year. If this committee wants updates any sooner than that, if you can just let us know. I mean, you know, Chair DeLima and I work on the agenda on an ongoing basis. So we do a proposed agenda, and then there are always changes. So, you know, I can come back anytime the board wants an update, even outside of whatever would be scheduled.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and for sharing all the recommendations, I guess, or the draft. I also am looking forward to seeing the timeline for the different areas in the proposal, with the idea of having the exceptions created in there where there is a problem with the timeline for extraordinary circumstances, that's embedded in this process. But another question I had was, if a couple of the investigations that are in the decision-making phase, if the problem has been a rotation of CASs or a rotation of principals who are the decision makers, is this something that, you know, could be a part of the rules where it is required that they make that decision before leaving their post in terms of laying out a timeline? Because then it sort of sounds like the process may likely begin all over again with a new CAS or new principal being put in place in terms of the decision making. You know, I know in other work environments, when someone leaves, you know, you need to finish your projects. You need to finish what's on the table in front of you before you exit the door. And this, you know, being potentially an individual's livelihood, you know, everything, it seems that could be something that could be embedded in this process in a fair way, given the opportunity for exceptions for extraordinary circumstances. What, do you have any top?
The answer is yes. The challenge is, how do you enforce that? When you have somebody, especially if they're retiring or if they're leaving for a different employer, I don't know that there is any way to enforce that. There's no sanction. So if somebody comes in, they're a principal, and they know that they're retiring in 3 months, and for whatever reason does not does not review or does not, you know, make a recommendation on an investigation report, how do we force them to do that? In most cases, I mean, obviously, we have very, very responsible principals and CASs. And that's why I say, I mean, I don't sit here and try to say, Principal so-and-so should have done this instead of all those other things.
Well, when we get to executive session, we can have a better feel, because we can start putting names and numbers to this stuff. We can't do it right now, because
Right.
I got some real good suggestions on what we could do, but, you know, that's not something we want to discuss.
But I will also say that certainly, again, in my time here, which is still less than a year, the fact that the board has made very, very public all of these issues and all of these questions and has been quite adamant about the need to improve, we have been passing that message down. As I said, I have been to probably half of the district principals meetings so far. I have others scheduled. Investigations and the need to give priority to investigations and decision-making is always part of what I discuss with them. And as I shared last time, their response is, can you please help us in terms of the investigation side? And I say yes. And that's part of the reason that we're working so hard to try to centralize, I think, more of the support and more of the investigations. So this is certainly an area that is very visible to all of the DOE administration, all of the DOE leaders, and it is helping. It definitely is helping. And when we have the deputy making sure that the CASs are on top of the decision-making, and the CASs making sure that the principals are on top of the decision-making. That is happening. But we're still dealing with backlogs and, messages before.
Okay, so with that, what we'll do is we'll continue to have this on the agenda periodically. The last discussion I had with Barbara was that we're going to have it on the agenda probably in November meeting to see what kind of progress we make between now and November. And as we continue to make, we have a lot of employees, we have a lot of schools, we have 15 complex areas. So in terms of the overall number of cases, it may be only microscopic compared to the number of employees and schools that we have, but the overriding concern is that if you're paying someone and there's an allegation of wrongdoing, we should either complete the investigation and make a decision, because if the employee is not guilty of any wrongdoing, then they should be reinstated ASAP. And if they are guilty of any wrongdoing, then we shouldn't be paying them for being out on leave. So I think we all subscribe to that. We just need to work towards reducing the timeline. So with that, Chair will entertain a motion to go into executive session for matters stated on the agenda. I do want to indicate that the first thing we're going to take up is the matter of well, we'll just go down the agenda. So we're going to first take up the complex area, then we'll move to the state librarian, then the evaluation of the superintendent, and then we'll revisit this subject in the executive session. And we have up until 11 o'clock, which is our next committee meeting. So is there a motion to go into executive session? Is it moved? It's been moved in second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. Motion carried. We in executive session.